Hello, everyone. Welcome to our DMU expert series of live talks. My name is May, and I'm delighted today to welcome Professor Malcolm Fisk, our Professor of Aging and Digital Health, to tell us all about a very important topic that's particularly been brought to the forefront at the moment globally, highlighted particularly during the pandemic. So here we are. Professor Malcolm. Hello, how are you this morning?
I'm very well, thank you very much, and looking forward to the dialogue with you.
Fantastic. So can you just introduce yourself briefly? Tell us who you are and what you're here to talk about today.
Well, yes, indeed. Who am I? Gosh, that's a big question, isn't it, to start with? Now, my background actually is one which includes local government, the private sector, as well as academia, and I'm certainly pleased to be here now at De Montfort, where there's such a great attention being given both to health issues, social care issues, and technological issues, and how these two or three areas come together. And that obviously, and I shall talk about that much more during the course of our dialogue about what that means and what that label digital health actually means. And perhaps I'd better actually do that now at the outset, is just make it clear that digital health is about the way that we access different health care and support services, essentially using digital means, using technological means. And this means there is actually a confusion of terms very often, because people watching this will have heard of things like telehealth and telemedicine and e-health, telecare, and so forth. And all of these can be embraced under that title, digital health. So whilst there is, as I say, some movement, some confusion, nevertheless, people will get the right idea that this is how we use technologies to help us with our health, or how we use those technologies to access health services, perhaps in a way that we didn't do before.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about how you started your research. How did you get involved in digital health?
Gosh, it's a long story, actually. My early days were in housing and social care, and I worked in local government, actually, within the Social Services Authority and housing authorities as well. And in those areas, I was responsible very much for older people's services, including sheltered housing. And at that time, and we're going back actually to the late 1970s, there was some interest in alarm devices and things like this, particularly for older people, and the way that they might be able to be used in what we recognize as sheltered housing now to obtain help when needed. Now, of course, we're far more sophisticated with our technologies now. So we're talking about intelligent communications technologies, which have now superseded the kind of alarm systems that I was dealing with in my early career. But I have kind of grown with the technologies, and I've grown with the thinking around the way we provide services to older people over the last 40 or so years. So it's really been a continuous process of change. It's been exciting all the way, and it promises to be even more exciting as we go into the future with things like artificial intelligence and genomics and things like this, if we get it right, of course. But yes, my background, very much older people. The technologies are relevant to us all, though, and I think that's one theme that will come through from our discussion later on.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So does this mean that your work has been at the interface between people and technologies?
Yes, it certainly does. Where I think things have changed most dramatically is that in those early days, it was a matter of providing services to people and providing the technologies that they could use in particular kinds of ways. There wasn't much in the way of a person's choice, whether they were an older person with a support need or a patient needing health support. Now we're in a situation where the technologies, and I will explain in a moment, are much cleverer. We have them. We have mobile phones that we use daily, which can give us access to a range of different services, apps and information and so forth. We have computers that can give us access to social networks as well, and empower us in different kind of ways, work opportunities, you name it, whatever age you are. So the whole context has been transformed. And we have a challenge, a responsibility, perhaps, to put it a bit more strongly, to make sure that we encourage the development of those technologies in the right kind of ways for a society that's going to be, as far as possible, integrated and less divided than we are at the moment, as far as health and other advantages and disadvantages are concerned.
Fantastic. And I know when we were chatting before, you were talking about sort of ageism and issues like that. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things about getting it right is to make sure that we don't necessarily repeat the patterns of service provision or service delivery, to put a more pejorative term on it, are not continued in the same kinds of ways. Because when it comes to older people, we've tended to divide our community into those people before retirement and those people after retirement, and then provide a special range of services for people who are over that particular age. And with that age has come even some specialisms, like geriatrics and things like this, which tend to label people in a rather disadvantaged kind of way. They point to an implied dependency of people who are after retirement age, which is far from the truth, because clearly the majority of people over 65 are able, they are fit, they are well. There are more and more older people involved in the workforce, myself included. And so we must recognize that those older people who are dependent, maybe 15 or 20% at the most of older people, are a minority. And we shouldn't allow the kind of negative image that we may have of dependency, of frailty, of sometimes poverty as well goes along with that, of the very eldest of people. And one way in which we could perhaps change our thinking if we do this is, and that's in the area of birthday cards, for instance, and the ageist phrases that we use. And I have here, an image here of five birthday cards here, which kind of indicate the way that we think about growing older, which isn't, I can honestly say from personal experience, isn't such a bad thing after all. But here we go with a big 4-0. And clearly people will have had birthday cards like that, those people who have reached 40. And the negative imagery that goes with that. You've got the 7 dwarfs of old age. Perhaps that's echoing the 7 ages of man that Shakespeare can take responsibility for, which led to, of course, a second childhood in the eldest of old age. And you've got some ambivalent messages there about 60 rocks, where the rocking chair puts a slightly different image on perhaps an aging rocker. And also you've got another birthday card there, which is pointing to some of maybe the good things about leisure time that can come with older age, but obviously an issue there about the lady's memory in the older age. And in the middle, there's something a bit more positive, just to show that there is a mix of messages that we can send our colleagues and friends as they do get older. Hopefully, we would lean on the positive side, even though something like 60 rocks is a nice ambivalent message, I think. And we do need to change our language as well. I mean, even the BBC is guilty of talking about the elderly as opposed to, and generalizing therefore, rather than talking about older people. And we have things like from the Office of National Statistics, you have dependency ratios, when these are not dependency ratios, they are age ratios, because again, it is labeling people over 65 as dependent. And I mentioned just earlier, very, very briefly, that we do seem to hold on to this notion of delivering services, which is a rather top-down term, whereas we should really be thinking of providing services in ways where older people and others can participate more as partners in their care, or indeed be more fully in control of their care and their health conditions that they may have. So we do live in a somewhat ageist society. We need to rethink perhaps our approaches to older age and recognize that that inclusion means that we must dispel some of these stereotypes that we may carry and may even use in our day-to-day language when we talk about, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, actually, older people are very willing to learn new tricks. When we come to technologies, if the technologies work for them, they will use them. Obviously, many of them have not worked in environments where computers were a regular part of the daily scene, and so it's only natural that they won't necessarily have some of the knowledge that is appropriate to using those kinds of devices. And I have to say, I mean, the design of some devices, and I held up this smartphone, for instance, this is no good for some people with visual impairments or have got dexterity problems. So there's a challenge there for designers to get the designs right on products, as well as the services being designed and provided rather than delivered in the right kinds of ways.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating that something as innocent as birthday cards, as you say, is perpetuating that ageism and the stereotypes and things like that. Yeah, something we might not necessarily even think about when we're picking a birthday card for somebody. So that's fantastic. So can you tell us about, so digital health, when you refer to that, what kind of technologies are you talking about? So you've already mentioned a few of them, but can you delve more into that?
Well, the range is now incredible, and it's increasing. You know, year on year, it's fascinating new devices, or there's new functionality that relates to some of the devices that we have, and many of those devices are portable and they are personal. And again, this comes back to the empowerment theme, the fact that we can escape from any institutional top-down approaches to ones where we are more in control because we have the devices. They are available at lower cost very often. So therefore, they're affordable to a wider range of people. And if we get the design right, again, they can be usable by a wider range of people as well. So what have we got? We've got old-style monitoring devices in the home. There's some issues there, by the way, about surveillance and data and the data that is collected and how we deal with that and how we make sure that people's privacy and confidentiality is maintained. We have got the mobile phone, of course, and that brings with it a huge array of apps, and well, not necessarily on the phone, but on our devices that we can access that provide us with all kinds of information, and not forgetting that they also provide access to social networks. So tremendous advantages of mobile devices, of smart devices. Now then, and two of the new things that are coming through, maybe I'll add more than two, actually, we'll see, but wearable devices that you can wear on your wrist like a Fitbit, and which may be able to help you manage your health, manage your fitness and so forth. No stigma attached to them, by the way, whatever age you are, because everybody would wear one of these for their own particular purposes. We have the COVID pandemic clearly bringing video communications to the fore because of the way that more and more people are consulting with their GPs or with their outpatient services. Now, that's not meaning that face-to-face contact and consultation with the medics is going to end. I think we will come back to a kind of balance between these kind of approaches. But video communications and simply the use of the telephone, these tools will find a stronger place within our health services in the future after the situation with COVID is resolved or settles down. So this means that either more and more people have to be able to use different devices and who are going to become more confident and more familiar with the technologies that they are able to access. And it certainly means that. It also means that the manufacturers and designers need to get a bit smarter on the way that these are designed, so they are more intuitive, more usable, and so forth. And the politicians, of course, need to make sure that the frameworks are in place so that even the most disadvantaged people who may both be disadvantaged in work, in income, in housing, you name it, will be able to have access to many of these technologies so that they can get to exactly the same kinds of services as everybody else who may be a bit more have more resources in order to access used by some of those technologies and services. So let me give you another example as well. There's something else that is coming through, especially from the technological side of things, and that's robots. Now, I mention these because there's a lot of silliness, if you like, around ideas about robots being companions for older people. And I've just given these three illustrations to help feed the discussion that we might have about robots. And the top left, these are all Japanese, by the way. And the top one is a robotic bear. It's called Robear. The clue is in the name, of course. And the idea of this bear is that is it he or is it she? I don't know. could use its two arms to carry you from your bed to the bathroom, to the kitchen, to the toilet, you name it. This is something to help move people who may have a mobility problem. And I actually use this one, probably I've used it maybe 3 or 4 times to make fun of the design of robots. I mean, the first thing is it just an assistive device? It's a machine to move people, for starters. So why do you have to put a smiley face on this robot? Why do you need to make it anthropomorphic? And why do you give it 2 arms? If it's going to be very safe and secure for a frail person being transported from their bed to the bathroom or something, why doesn't it have 6 arms instead of 2? So just to get our thinking right here, we don't want kind of naive assumptions being made by technologists, perhaps thinking in rather ageist kind of ways, that robots are going to be good for older people, they're going to substitute carers and so forth, and they're going to provide all kinds of functional help and perhaps companionship. And companionship is perhaps more in the direction of the robot below, which is Pepper robot. And again, I've tended to make fun of Pepper because of the fact that he or she goes around with a display on her chest. And the person who that robot is relating to will communicate, obviously via speech and so forth, but also via that particular screen. And again, my question is, well, why is the screen mounted on a robot when actually you could have it simply on an iPad and so forth? You don't need a machine like that to wander about your house communicating with you if the main function is to do with communication. Right, finally, before I come back to a more general point about digital health, you've got Paro, the robotic seal. Now, I actually have got some time for Paro because he or she has shown his or her benefits for many older people with dementia. Now, Paro responds to you when you stroke him or her and makes seal-like noises. I've met him or his clones on 5 or 6 occasions now, and I can certainly attest to that. And like any kind of cuddly toy, it's also fun to have Paro around. Very expensive, mind you. I think the last time I looked, it was about 5,000 euros. And there is some evidence to suggest, as I say, there's benefits, but there's also evidence to suggest that dolls and other cuddly toys, which are less sophisticated than Paro, can be helpful and reassuring to some people, especially with dementia. Now, the argument has been made that using things like Paro may be infantilizing to older people, but as far as I'm concerned, if it reassures Mr. Brown, Mrs. Shah, or whoever, then that's good news for us when they haven't got that reassurance and they may have a cognitive impairment. But beware, there's some ethical issues here which we need to take account of. And then looking at digital health more generally, you can see the range of devices that are available to us. If we can go back to that one, that's right. Wrist-worn wearable technologies, and in the illustration at the bottom there, you can just about see shoes and so forth that can have sensors devices in them which can monitor someone's movement and things like that. It illustrates the direct communication consultation with the GP. And one thing I haven't mentioned is voice assistants, your Alexas and Google Homes and things like this. They, I am certain, will become more and more important mediums for communication for old people and others in the future. Friendly, supportive, and you don't have to use your fingers to control access to different sets of information and so forth.
That is absolutely lots to think about there in terms of, particularly as you say, the robots. You know, why are they like humans and animals? And yes, they are so much more relatable, I guess, aren't they? If it's got a smiling face and arms, as you say, and things like that. But of course, they're not human. So why are they made to look like that? So yeah, absolutely, very interesting. So I just wanted to touch upon some of the committees and the organisations that you're a part of. So you're a member of a variety of committees, including the World Health Organization, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, as well as ANEC. So what is it that drives your passion to be involved in such a dynamic field?
Yeah, well, actually, that's easy to answer. Is because I really do want to see changes take place, because we have kind of got trapped within the patterns of service delivery that were established, in essence, after the Second World War. And there's also some implications here for the professionals. So whether you're a nurse, an occupational therapist, or a social worker, or a paramedic, then clearly there is some new learning or some new thinking that is necessary to enable people to think about the technologies and the way they can be used, and also think about those technologies from the people, the patient perspective as well, how they would like to use them if they have got a healthcare need. So being involved in NICE is great for me personally, because I didn't come from a health background. I think I mentioned I came from more a housing and social care background. So as more and more people age at home, and as more and more people are managing their illnesses themselves and from home, and as they learn more about those different conditions, then I'm very pleased to be in the mix with NICE, in order that my knowledge of some of those conditions improves, and my knowledge of the dynamics, if you like, around service provision and how they are handling change. NICE, by the way, is I think I'm right in saying, no, I know I'm right in saying, is actually quite on the ball as far as digital health is concerned. And we'll probably see more and more reference to digital health solutions in many of the quality standards that they produce. Now, with regard to what else now we're talking about, ANEC. ANEC is actually the consumer voice on standardization, and so I'm involved on a number of committees there, where I do obviously quite strongly emphasize the importance of taking things from a patient perspective. And the good thing about that is it gets me onto committees where which are dominated very often by manufacturers and designers of different technologies. And so I am forever emphasizing some of the ethical issues that need to be taken account of in design, which includes more, by the way, than just accessibility and usability, but it includes things like interoperability, because one of the terrible legacies, if you like, of our existing health services is very often different technologies, different services work within silos, and so there's very little transferability of data and information. And let me think. You asked me about one other as well. I think. Oh,
World Health National.
Yes, World Health Organization. Yes, indeed. Well, they of course are very preoccupied at the moment with the pandemic, but also wanting to prepare us for future pandemics as well. And I have to admit that my involvement with the WHO has not been huge. It's been inputs into their strategy for e-health to date. But nevertheless, they are very aware of the empowerment potential around digital health, especially when you consider that they are working in all the countries of the world, including developing countries, where they haven't got the same bureaucratic barriers that we have in the UK. And I think that we will in the future, and this is one good reason why I should continue to work with WHO, we will be able to learn lessons, whether it's from Tanzania or Bolivia, about the way that different technologies are being applied in very effective kind of ways that very often can help people, regardless of age, in rural and remote areas, for instance, to have access to health services. And the other area where WHO are involved is in emergencies, not just pandemics, but of course where there can be other emergencies, earthquakes, floods, famine, things like this, where again there is a very important role for digital health to enable people to communicate and actually provide care at a distance.
That's brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you. So a very busy guy with lots of different roles there, very important roles in all those organisations. So you mentioned that your work involves older people, and you've already talked quite a bit about that. So while we're still under social distancing, what are some of the challenges that are facing older people, and what are the digital capabilities available to resolve this?
Well, we've touched on some of these already, actually, because clearly there is a kind of imperative that we must design products appropriately and we must help older people and others to develop the skills that they need to, and the confidence to access the services in new kinds of ways using the technologies that I hope will be available to them in the future. I do actually believe that online services should be something in everybody's home. There should be an entitlement in the same way as water, electricity, gas, and things like this that you have in your home, and that would be a great equalizer as well. And so indeed. That is a very important aspect, if you like, of older people's ability to communicate, but also it can help resolve issues around social isolation. And I think I mentioned earlier as well, access to social networks and things like this, so that at least there is more contact between those people and others. One thing I would want to say, by the way, as an aside, is that it's older people and younger people who are the loneliest when it comes to any kind of analysis by age. But clearly older people do tend to experience a larger number of losses than most of the rest of us because, the loss of a spouse, the loss of income, very often living in poor housing, and of course the loss of friends as well. And also the inability to sometimes mix as much as they would like because of hearing impairments and sight impairments and things like this. But I'm making a point about the minority who are more dependent, of course, as I said at the outset.
Fantastic. And what about things like smart homes? I know when we were chatting earlier, you mentioned about what kind of a role does that play?
Yeah. Well, there's, with regard to the things that are coming through, artificial intelligence, links with the Internet of Things, and smart homes, definitely. Smart homes have been around for a while, to be honest with you. They started off as intelligent homes, and the focus has tended to be on security and energy usage. And what has happened over the years, though, is there's been intermittent attention given to older people or people with disabilities and mobility problems, and the way that smart homes can actually help them live independently. Now, this is an illustration, obviously, of a very nice-looking smart home for, no doubt, a very wealthy person, where you can see that the kind of devices that are signaled on the slide that they would have, monitoring water usage, the padlock indicates that there would be a security system there. There would be control of lighting. There would be cameras, more for security as well. So energy and security has been the main theme. Now, there is, as I say, more attention being given to older people's accommodation, including similar kinds of features, but also giving attention to the kind of services we've been talking about at the moment. So digital health will and be integral to many of the smart homes that are being developed. The other point I need to make, though, is that, again, we have the purveyors, the designers of smart homes who are thinking in terms of nice, glossy, new developments, new housing developments. And the real game that they should be playing is one which is thinking about, well, how can all our homes be smart? How can we all benefit from some of those? Now, obviously, many of our homes are not very useful when it comes to mobility. We may have narrow staircases and steps out of the back door and things like this. But nevertheless, there's all kinds of additional benefits that smart devices can make in all our homes, and I'd like to see more attention to that. And the other question is, just how smart do we need to be as residents within smart homes? And it comes back to a point I did make earlier, that we have to take responsibility for learning to do things better, to learning to interact with the technologies more effectively. But please, I must ask the designers to pay more attention to the way that they design their products in order for them to be more inclusive.
Absolutely, yes. It's very important, I think, to point out that everybody's homes are very different. Everybody's knowledge of technology is very different, and yes, absolutely, designers do have to take that into account. So how do you think this will affect online usage in decades to come? And obviously, we're seeing an increase in online usage across all generations. So, from your research, how do you think this will impact on the way that we think about managing our digital health?
Yeah, well, I've used the word confidence a couple of times, and I would also link with that word trust, because there are some issues around cybersecurity. There are some elements of distrust which undermine people's, not just older, everybody's willingness to totally buy in to some of the new technologies that are on offer. And whilst I can certainly see increasing usage by all people, including older people, it does carry a precondition, and that is that precondition around making sure that systems are secure, making sure that people's personal data is not able to be sold willy-nilly to Google or pharma companies and so forth. And also, I say, with the designs being in place as well. So yes, it will grow. It will grow. There's no doubt about it. I saw a graph just the other day about the internet usage, for instance, and there you had people aged over 65. It was about 65% of them actually were actually regular internet users. So there was an awful lot of people who weren't using the internet, and we can take that as a kind of proxy for technologies more generally. But that rate is increasing quite rapidly. We've got the cohort effect. We've got younger cohorts of older people coming through. So within a decade, I would say that we'd be near to 90% or heading towards maybe 100% of people who are online using technologies and using it as a major part of their lives. Now, what I don't want to see is that connectivity being a requirement for all people. There are many people who may have real difficulties in using the technologies. That obviously links to the question you asked earlier about loneliness as well. So we really, really must make sure that there's still scope for people to link with services in person and receive certainly personal care, no doubt about that whatsoever. And also where we can see a situation, hopefully, where some of those technologies will enable people to communicate in new ways, whether it's your grandmother communicating with her sister in Adelaide or something like this. All these things which can help people, motivate people, help people feel better and improve well-being. So when we talk about health, by the way, let's think about health not just in its clinical sense, but in its broader well-being sense as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're coming up towards the end of the live stream now, so we've just got a couple more questions to ask you, if that's okay. So for anybody watching, what advice can you give students who are looking to follow their passion around digital technologies?
Well, there's two routes actually to following your passion. I mean, it may be you come from a more technologically oriented way of thinking, in which case, certainly at DMU, there's plenty of courses that relate to that, from computer science through to cybersecurity, and more attention is now being given, of course, to AI, artificial intelligence. So, but the important thing about those courses is that they do embed those elements which are concerned with ethics, and DMU is very strong on ethics as well, by the way. And one aspect of those ethics is, of course, engagement, involvement with and sensitivity to the needs of the people that use the technologies concerned. And then on the health and social care side, of course, there's a multiplicity of courses, nursing, paramedics, occupational therapies, social work, and so forth, where issues around digital health are being, or digital tools, I should say, are being taken more and more into account. And bearing in mind that, of course, in the health and social care field, we are training people who will be the future purveyors of health and social care. There, clearly, we're very, very alert to the different kinds of training needs that need to be addressed because of the technologies and so forth, and the change in the ways of thinking as well about the use of those technologies and the empowerment that can be afforded to people very often who might have been felt as vulnerable and incapable in the past, but actually with the right technologies we can help them a great deal.
Great, thank you very much for that. So we're coming up to the end now. So a final a word from you. So if there's one thing to take away from all of this, so obviously a very important topic of digital health, and we've covered so much in this half an hour. But what would you say if there was one thing for our viewers to take away, and a piece of advice or any tips on digital health? What would that be?
Well, I think the most important thing is I probably emphasized too much the technologies during this discussion we've had, May, because the technologies are a tool to other things, really. So if we talk about empowerment, then it's not the technologies really. Well, yes, it is that they're a facilitator, I suppose, of changes in behavior. So I guess the message is, let's think about how, when we harness technologies, um, what precisely are we harnessing them for? Can they actually enable us to reconfigure, change the way that we provide our services for people who may be vulnerable? And to what extent are we going to be looking more broadly at the public and preventative health agenda, if you like, at enabling people, empowering people with regard to managing their own health and lifestyles? And when we talk about wearables, for instance, and apps and so forth, of course, we've got a tremendous tool there for people of all ages to take more responsibility for their health, whether it's exercise or whether it's nutrition and things like this. And for old people, maybe there are some issues about helping people with their therapies and they're prompting them on their medication, and indeed encouraging them perhaps with other unhealthy things like quitting smoking and things like this. So a broad range of agendas, behavioral agendas, that we can address and we wish to address, where the technologies are the tools. So I'm saying, don't be too narrowly focused on the technologies, but think more about what we can do with them, how they can really enhance well-being, empower people, and enable us to do things differently.
Absolutely. Yes, very important advice there. So that's fantastic. Well, we've come to the end of the live stream now. Yeah, that remains for us to say thank you for watching and goodbye. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you very much again, Malcolm. Goodbye.